Hello, and welcome to our virtual broadcast, Phoenix, the rebirth of the Wildland Fire Mitigation Program, presented by Jesse Sievers, Richard Nieto, and Lance Fresquez. Lance is an emergency preparedness coordinator at LANL. He has 5 years of experience in security and emergency management. Lance also serves as the emergency management environmental management system point of contact. Richard is a wildland fire management officer at LANL with more than 35 years of wildland fire aviation, the forest management experience. Richard is responsible for the LANL Wildland Fire Management Program to include prevention, mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery activities. Jesse has more than 17 years of emergency management experience with local government emergency management, wildland fire response, and emergency management policy research. He is also a certified emergency manager through the International Association of Emergency Managers and has academic publications in emergency management. Unfortunately, we won't have any time for Q&A after this, so please send any questions you may have to the presenters below. And now it's my pleasure to turn over the virtual stage to Jesse, Richard, and Lance.
Hello, I'm Jesse Sievers. I'm from Los Alamos National Laboratory, and I will be presenting on LANL's Phoenix, the rebirth of the Wildland Fire Management Program. I'm going to be joined by Lance Fresquez. Unfortunately, Richard Nieto couldn't make it, but I will start the presentation, pass it over to Lance, and then he'll pass it back to me for a closeout. So with that, we'll begin. The agenda for our presentation is as follows. So we're going to talk a little bit about the background and history of wildland fire here at LANL. We're going to break our presentation up into 3 categories, and that's preparedness, mitigation, and response. And we're going to go through 3 different timelines, where we were, where we are, and where we're going. And again, Lance is going to tackle where we are. I'll take the front section and then close out as well. Okay, so a little bit of background about Los Alamos. Los Alamos National Laboratory and the town of Los Alamos is right in the middle of a wildland fire urban interface. Elevations here range from 6,400 to 7,400 feet. Dominant vegetation is ponderosa pine, juniper, but Los Alamos is kind of uniquely set up into, it's on the top of mesas, but it also has sites that are on the bottom, or facilities at the bottom. So in some areas it's up in a mountainous terrain, and in others we're almost in the desert. So we're kind of right in the middle of 2 geographic zones, if you will. Ponderosa forest, which is on the upper end of the mesas, was established in this region about 8,000 years ago. Tree densities initially were about 50 to 150 trees per acre. What I've been told when I was working for the Forest Service is that if you're on flat ground, you would be able to see almost a mile through the trees. As you can see on the pictures on the right, our forests are pretty high density right now, sometimes up to 1,300 trees per acre. And there's a lot of reasons for that. And we're kind of in the same boat the rest of the country is when it comes to being a little bit behind the curve on mitigation, and that's due to some pretty aggressive suppression policies and grazing and some other human interaction, which has really withdrawn fire from the ecosystem, which would have killed out some of that lower lying vegetation. So much more dense, thick forests that are susceptible to different diseases, and then obviously wildland fire. 2 major fires, and I'm not going to go through them in depth. If you want to Google them, if you somehow haven't heard about these. It's 2000 Cerro Grande fire, 47,000 acres plus, and then also the 2011 Las Conchas fire, which is the largest fire in the state history. Both impacting LANL, the first one burning down significant structures at both the county and on LANL property. Okay, the next part of the slide is the presentation is going to be where we were. So this is a little history of our program at LANL. Prior to 2008, the wildland fire, there wasn't really a wildland fire program. There were different aspects of the program that were kind of splintered across the institution without really a centralized organization that was tackling the issue here. In 2008 was really the first start of addressing that by trying to centralize program or programmatic elements, if you will. That was under the Emergency Operations Group here at the Emergency Management Division. The first iteration of the first program, Wildland Fire Management Program Plan, was also developed in 2008. Then in 2013, LANL decided to contribute resources to it. So 2 staff members were assigned to the Wildland Fire Program to manage it and implement it. They also moved over to T849 here. It's a tech area on the site. That's an interagency fire center. It's leased out to Bandolier, and then we have space within that building as well to enhance our collaboration and coordination of activities. In 2015, we did our second iteration of our program plan, our Wildland Fire Management Program plan, and that was from FY 2015 to FY 2020 is what that plan covered. Then in 2017, our field office, Los Alamos field office, submitted a memo of concern on our wildland program, largely related to mitigation and preparedness as a supplemental environmental assessment. In response to that, in 2018, the Wildland Fire Program was moved under Emergency Preparedness, which I'm the group leader of, and that was to give it more resources. So, access to our emergency planners, our ERO training officer, drills, exercises, and the like. When the program was established, and it's always been a very core feature of our program, the program was emphasized mitigation. We bought a lot of heavy equipment, such as masticators, to make our projects more efficient instead of subcontracting out, doing that internally for projects. And then mitigation projects really focused on life safety. So reestablishing fire breaks, maintaining fire roads or escape routes, and treating the roadsides of common evacuation routes. And we're going to go into depth a little bit more on that when Lance speaks about mitigation and where we are. And then in response, where we were in the response phase, prior to the fall of 1989, the Los Alamos Fire Department was actually part of DOE under the GS structure. They were GS4s here. Then in 1989, the fire department moved under the county, went back to the county, and initial attack responsibility since then have actually been flowed through the fire department through a cooperative agreement with DOE. So not DOE is in the M&O contractor, but DOE office. So that agreement's between those two. Historically, our program, the Wildland Fire Program for the M&O side, hasn't been as integrated into the field response. The responses that we would do would mostly be supporting here at the Emergency Operations Center what the field response was. As we talked about before, Cerro Grande, Las Conchas, two major fires, type 1, that's the biggest fires for complexity purposes that we can have. Both of those were managed by external organizations, and they started off-site, and then obviously impacted LANL. So, but the management of those hasn't been from a LANL perspective. With that, I'm going to turn it over. The next part of our presentation is where we are, and I'm going to give it to my colleague, Lance Fresquez.
All right, thank you, Jesse. I appreciate that. My name is Lance Fresquez. I also support the Emergency Preparedness Group here at the Los Alamos National Laboratory. And I'll be talking about where we are as far as Wildland Fire Program initiatives in regards to mitigation, response, and preparedness. So beginning with preparedness, in 2018, the Emergency Management Division conducted the first assessment on the Wildland Fire Program. This was a big deal because we hadn't ever performed a programmatic assessment on wildland fire programs here at LANL before. And so we identified several improvement items that have created initiatives within the Emergency Management Division for us to address to improve our wildland fire management program. Starting with number one, we found that there was unclear roles and responsibilities for LANL wildland fire emergency personnel, lack of personal protective equipment, and unclear training and qualification direction and expectations. So what we've done to address those issues that we've identified since then is we've been embracing national wildfire coordinating group standards. That's industry standards that the United States Forest Service uses, and also the National Park Service. We've provided the appropriate PPE to our LANL wildland fire responders here within emergency management to ensure that when they do go to the field, we have all the appropriate PPE for safety. And then clarifying emergency management response roles and responsibilities for wildland fires. So one of the biggest things that we put in place for that was an agency representative checklist for wildland fires for our personnel to respond with. And so that there's clear expectations with incident commander and what the role of LANL emergency management is during a wildland fire. Also related to preparedness is most recently the Wildland Fire Annex. Currently, our EMD Plan 100, the LANL All Hazards Emergency Management Plan, is in approval with the Department of Energy to ensure that we align with an all hazards approach. So we also incorporated a wildland fire annex as part of that. So we interface with our standard emergency management protocols, and then we include this wildland fire annex that is really speaking to the specifics and the nuances of wildland fire response here at LANL, and the complexities of that. It's also written to address 420.1c facility safety. There's a wildland fire component to that DOE order as well. In addition, it addresses DOE standard 1066 fire protection, and the wildland fire functions in that standard as well to ensure that we're in alignment with our DOE orders and standards while we wrote this annex. We anticipate this to be finalized once the EMD Plan 100 is finalized, and it will also address some of the improvement items that are being developed right now by the Office of Inspector General here in 2020 so that we align with the improvements right away, and we begin on some of these initiatives. Also related to preparedness, we've had 2 strategic hires recently. The first is Richard Nieto in January of 2020 as the LANL Wildland Fire Management Officer. He is the program manager for the Wildland Fire Program, and any future type of coordination regarding LANL Wildland Fire, Rich Nieto along with Jesse Sievers would be the point of contact to go with. He's a type 1 incident commander, which is very significant. It takes years of experience to get those types of qualifications in the wildland fire industry. He has over 35 years of wildland fire experience, and he's managed several significant events, even such as he was part of the World Trade Center responses as well. And he has been critical to the program as far as prevention, mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery. The next hire is Jim Jones as the LANL Wildland Fire Project Manager. He's been known here at LANL as a senior project manager and has been very successful for the Wildland Fire Program in cutting down red tape and barriers and obtaining funding for some of the mitigation projects that are critical to protecting the laboratory. He also has over 30 years of experience and now is in charge of our LANL Wildland Fire Mitigation Project. Mitigation. So in 2018, Jesse Sievers, the Emergency Preparedness Group Leader, and Jennifer Payne, the Division Leader for Environmental Protection and Compliance, formed the Wildland Fire Mitigation Working Group. And this was a big deal for mitigation because this ensured that stakeholders across from LANL came together to address unique wildland fire concerns. So LANL Fire Protection, Los Alamos County Fire Department, Environmental Protection and Compliance, High Explosive Operations, Utilities and Infrastructure, N3B, and of course the LANL Wildland Fire Program are all in this working group. So it gives us a common objective and a common operating picture to establish projects and initiatives. So some of the highlights that we've done in this working group is we developed the Wildland Fire Mitigation and Forest Health Plan. I led that effort along with environmental stewardship to develop that plan, which outlines how we're going to conduct mitigation and what are our priorities. We also developed the FY 2020 Wildland Fire Annual Operating Plan and Forest Health Plan, which identifies the treatments and projects for the fiscal year of 2020. And that's an annual plan that stakeholders come together in this mitigation working group to come up with these plans and projects together to address mitigation here at LANL. And then most recently, here in 2020, a couple of weeks ago, we published a white paper on mitigation strategies here at LANL that discusses the pros and cons of commonly used mitigation strategies that you can use in wildland fire industry, such as what we commonly use here is mastication. And then I also explored alternatives such as prescribed fire that could be potentially used as well. There was also a cost-benefit analysis in that paper, and it's going to provide a nice foundation when we work with our DOE customers on why we choose the certain mitigation practices we do and why we choose not to use others. Mitigation priority criteria. So this was established in our Wildland Fire Mitigation and Forest Health Plan. And this is important because when we do get funding for these mitigation projects, this helps us prioritize which ones we're going to tackle first. So very high, this is going to impact life and safety. And it's critical to the LANL mission and it requires annual maintenance. High impacts life and safety, but may not require annual maintenance. And moderate, less likely to impact life and safety, and maintenance gaps can be addressed with relative ease. So just an example of how some of these things are prioritized here at LANL. On the right there, you can see some pictures. That top one there is of our evacuation routes. These are the roadside mitigation treatments. These are critical so if we were to have a site-wide evacuation or a partial activation of a technical area here at the laboratory. Our folks and personnel would be protected from critical wildland fire behavior that could impact them. Then on the second picture down there that you see, that's some of our fire roads. That's also very critical to ensure we have good ingress and egress routes to access some of these fires on LANL property and to ensure that our responders are responding safely. And then lastly, at the bottom, defensible space, ensuring that our structures have strong defensible space around them to sustain wildland fire behavior and to protect our personnel. And then on the left there, you can see a chart on kind of how we prioritize that, with wildland fire roadside mitigation being at the top, and then open mitigation treatments kind of being towards the bottom, and those vary depending on where these open space projects are. This is more related to forest health and can have several different impacts. Mitigation also, one of the biggest efforts that we had was a result of the March 2019 high wind event recovery. We experienced an unprecedented wind event in March of 2019 where we had 80 to 100 mile per hour winds that impacted the LANL site that knocked down thousands of trees to disposition. So it's been a large recovery effort from the Wildland Fire Program to reduce our ladder fuels here to reduce critical wildland fire behavior. So some of the big project initiatives was removing these trees, decking them up, and then also making them available to our northern Pueblo agencies. So that built good interagency relationships and made sure that we were making good use of this fuel that we were removing from the site. So to date, we've removed about 850 trees this year. Last year was 1,250 trees, and we have the goal of removing 1,000 trees this year. Under response, so I touched on this a little earlier, but one of our critical aspects for response right now is the agency representative role for our LANL Wildland Fire Program. So our incident response commanders, who are our all hazards field responders, and then our LANL Wildland Fire Management Officer, they're going to be the ones serving as this role as agency representative to interface with the incident commander for that fire. And their primary role is to provide LANL specific support. We do have specific nuances here, such as consent order sites and threatened and endangered habitat, and also archaeological sites here on LANL property that those personnel can assist with coordination of getting LANL resources out there for the incident commander and then providing subject matter expertise to that incident commander. Our primary agency representative is our LANL Wildland Fire Management Officer due to experience and qualifications in the industry, having served as a Type 1 incident commander. So some of our recent fires that we've had, in 2019, we had the Omega Canyon fire, which was also declared operational emergency and prompted the evacuation of TA-53 here on the laboratory. And then approximately about a week later, we had the Aggie fire in that same canyon, and both were a result of power lines. So we did learn several lessons from this. So one of them, one of the big things was access control into Los Alamos Canyon. When we have fire activity, there's lots of projects that are going on in that canyon. So ensuring that we have strong access control in and out of that canyon was one of the paramount things that we learned. The risk of power lines during windy conditions, both those had high wind event type days. And so just making sure that we have a strong inspection program to look at those power lines is critical going forward as well. And then complexities of LANL, there, the consent order sites, the T&E habitat, the archaeological sites that are in these canyons can pose unique concerns for wildland fire response, especially with the consent order sites where we have to have the Emergency Technical Support Center evaluate some of those sites before fire suppression efforts can commence. And then most recently, we've had several lightning-induced fires here in 2020, none of which posed an immediate threat to LANL, but they did give us the opportunity to practice response roles as the agency representative. And all those fires are listed there on the left, and we're very small fire, type 4, type 5, type 4 type complexities. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Jesse Sievers for where we are going and our challenges ahead with the Wildland Fire Program. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Lance. Lance is one of our highest performers here in Emergency Management Division, and he's very established in the community and not interested in jobs elsewhere. So he's staying with us. So don't get any ideas. Okay, so the last part of our presentation is where we're going, and I'll cover that section here before we close out. Okay, again, in the categories of preparedness, mitigation, and response. Under preparedness, so DOE Order 151D requires that we have an ERO ready and capable for Type 4 incidents. So for wildland fire, Type 5 translates into a single tree on fire. Type 4 is a couple of local resources, and that's about it. Not much more with other jurisdictions or any other higher fire behavior than that. So with that being said, we're relying on being able to outreach and pull in resources of higher qualification, Forest Service, Park Service, those type of incident command or incident management teams. To do that, we want to be ahead of the curve, and we want to start providing standardized briefings of LANL. So when they get here, here's what you can expect for our wildland programs. Here's an overview of our hazards that you face here, so that it's a streamlined approach to and a smooth transition. Another step of that would be the delegation of authority process. So right now, authority having jurisdiction belongs to Department of Energy. We want to help assist in that process by making sure within our EOC and within our Emergency Management Division documents that process is spelled out. So if we do have an incident management team that does come on site, we can delegate that authority. DOE can delegate that authority through us helping facilitate that process to that incident management team for a smooth transition. We're also, one of the neat things that we have here at LANL and that we're lucky to have here is we're able to embrace the DOE science mission. And Lance and I did a presentation here this last year on fire modeling. And what we're able to do is reach out and get our wildland fire behavior scientists at LANL, work with them. They're doing next generation fire modeling. We're able to pilot some of those programs here locally. So we're trying to get them integrated both into our mitigation programs and our response phases too. So we're excited to continue and grow that relationship internally. The next thing that we are trying to grow as well is SimTable, and what that is. If any of you have seen just basic sand tables, it's a pretty common practice within the wildland industry is to use sand tables where you have a small sandbox with different micro machines or Hot Wheels that you walk through decision making, showing if there were a fire here, having decision makers walk through different scenarios. What SimTable's able to do is enhance the technology of that and actually put a screen onto the table, shoot a screen onto the table, and then also put fire modeling through it so it can show a fire progressing a little bit more realistic for the decision makers practicing that. It is built for training only, not for doing actual models in real life. However, our LANL wildland fire scientists have worked with SimTable, and in the future there might be an option to get something else under the hood where we could use that in an EOC environment or in the field. We're also enhancing our collaboration, internal and external, with our internal and external organizations for different fuel and weather conditions. So we're sharing information there. So with our Park Service, Forest Service partners, to make sure that we're kind of all on the same page as far as here's the risks we're facing, here's some of the decisions that we're making regarding fuel and weather or fuel and mitigation, so that we're a unified approach to our strategies. Also under mitigation, one of the things we're looking at getting completed this fiscal year is a site-wide risk assessment. This one is significantly going to be enhanced. It's in alignment with 1143 standards by inputting much or a lot of more variables, about 20 some different variables that we're going to weight as part of that risk assessment. And those would include values at risk, such as our EPHA facilities, our occupied buildings, maybe our emergency response facilities. So those would all be valued at a higher rate. Also looking at our egress routes, ingress routes, and then ignition risks too. So some of the activities that we do here at LANL, such as shot activity or firing sites, takes those into consideration too. So we're looking forward to getting that produced to significantly enhance the quantitative data that that's used to make decisions for us when we're doing mitigation projects. A lot of what we've done in the past is qualitative in approach. So the mitigation working group, getting a lot of stakeholders together and talking about risks and what priorities. This one is going to inject a lot more quantitative, so we're pretty excited about that. We also have been pairing up with our weapons programs here to enhance the firing site treatments to lower the risk there in the event that we do have a start, that we know exactly what we can expect for fire behavior. That ties back into that site-wide risk assessment. We're also, every year, we're going to continue to make sure we have operating plans that we all agree on ahead of time of what our priorities are going to be for mitigation projects and where our budget's going to go. One thing that we've done just recently is start to explore remote automated weather stations, the use of those throughout the LANL site. What that's going to do is give us more localized weather. Again, like we were talking about, we're on top of a mesa, but we also have facilities at the bottom. So sometimes using larger met data that we get off of either towers or just generalized met data isn't really helpful for our situation locally, as we have a lot of micro weather patterns. Also, what that'll do for us is enhance our fire danger rating and our restriction process. So if we can get that localized weather, localized information on fuels, such as doing our own fuel sampling, that'll be able to enhance what our fire danger ratings would be here, and which impacts our restriction process, which can be pretty impactful as far as mission and cost. Lastly, in the response phase, we're going to continue to work on NWCG quals, and Rich Nieto, we have him luckily on board, and that's going to help with that. So we're going to continue to embrace that. We're also going to increase the formality of our program. So we've done a lot of putting things on paper that were typically done in the past, maybe by more of a tribal type knowledge, making sure that the formality of our program is there and sustainable for the next folks coming in. And then interface with interagency counterparts to share information and briefings. We've covered that a little bit, but we definitely want to collaborate and build that relationship with our offsite partners. And that ties into enhanced GIS applications. They're doing a lot of cool stuff in the wildland industry around us, and we want to be on board with that. So we're working through some security measures to make sure we can do that. And then I think I've touched about the LANL EOC capabilities and embracing our science mission. So some challenges ahead for everything that we just talked about, and this is our last slide here, so our forests are unhealthy and unnatural, and we're behind the curve. This is something that well before LANL was established, policies and human interaction with the ecosystem that's withdrawn fire and made some pretty unhealthy conditions. So we're trying our best. We put a lot of resources and trying to make sure that we can show people the risk and educate everybody. But we might not be successful. We could still have a chance to have a fire before we get caught up. So that's a challenge that we do face. And the risk that we have here is mission impacting. This is a showstopper for LANL. If we do get a large fire that comes through, this could potentially be, it's mission impactful. Wildland fire is also highly susceptible to the issue attention cycle, as well as educational barriers. So just like anything else in emergency management, any other hazard, once the hazard happens is usually when people focus on it, and you tend to be able to get more funding, but a lot of that ends up on the recovery side of it. So we're really trying hard to get ahead of that, and that's why we focus on the mitigation side. But it's a significant issue, that to get people to spend money on wildland fire ahead of time takes some significant resources, and making sure that people understand the risk that we face. And then lastly, wildland fire is a wide-scale, highly complex problem. So in public policy speak, it's absolutely a wicked problem requiring a network solution. So there's a lot of unknown variables. It's not something that we can just solve going it alone. We have to reach out. We have to be on the same page as everybody else around us and keep ahead of the curve. So it definitely takes an integrated approach, which is also why we're embracing that science mission that we have here. So with that, we always like to close our presentations for New Mexico. The New Mexicans have tough choices to make, red or green. And we'll open it up to questions at this time. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, gentlemen, for your presentation. I know there's questions, but please send them to the speakers directly. Don't forget to do your survey as well to get credit for attending this session. And our next session will be Lawrence Livermore National Labs MRAP procedures with Jerry Paulson. Thanks. Stick around.